Welcome, everybody. It's lovely to be here for the second day of Kimposium, the sequel. Welcome back to those of you who came yesterday, and welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time today. Yesterday was an absolutely brilliant day, so incredibly interesting. Lots of really exciting new scholarship about this cultural object that is the Kardashians. Huge welcomes to everybody. Huge thank yous to those who presented yesterday so absolutely brilliantly with such incredible insights and imagination. And we are in for some real treats today. I'm looking forward to every single session. Let me introduce our very first session of the day. This session is called Birth and Death, and the first paper is by Ruby Smith, and Ruby's paper is titled Nobody Can Steal Our Bodies Ever: Celebrity, Death and Immortality, Tales from the Kardashian Crypt. Ruby Smith is a design strategist and a researcher based in London. Her interest, and she applies her interest and work in future forecasting, and she's fascinated in the possibilities of death in the digital age and what that might mean for celebrities and for cultural memory. So I'm really looking forward to this paper, and take it away, Ruby.
Hi, thanks Meredith for that great introduction. I'm just going to share my screen. So yeah, as Meredith was saying, the title of my paper today is Nobody Can Steal Our Bodies Ever: Celebrity, Death and Immortality, Tales from the Kardashian Crypt. I think death is super interesting because generally our relationship to death is one of distance and fear, and thinking beyond our own life and beyond our existence is incredibly difficult, especially living in a world entrenched by capitalism, which is only interested in the generation of capital and not something the dead are typically known for. Jean Baudrillard stated in Symbolic Exchange and Death, strictly speaking, we no longer know what to do with them, since today it's not normal to be dead, and this is new. To be dead is an unthinkable anomaly. Nothing else is as offensive as this. And I think this is similar to how the Kardashians feel. I feel like they fear death, and in turn, so do we. Their obsession with youthfulness, tonedness, plastic surgery, agency and control, everything they do is in opposition to death, and they aren't just satisfied with being alive. They have to show us they're thriving through everything they do. And that's the we're making memories, we're just living life, that they repeat constantly throughout the show. And in pre-capitalist societies, death is seen as a journey to somewhere beyond this world into another, and the dead are often seen as guardians or spiritual advisors to the living, and they have a lot of agency. So if we think to pharaohs that can guide their people even after death. And it's also quite interesting when we think of Robert Kardashian Sr., almost the spectre of death that overshadows them in hologram form, stating that he's watching over them, or he's proud of Kim following his footsteps in law school. And we're starting to see this similar feeling, the dead being seen as guardians. So immortality is defined as this indefinite continuation of someone's life after death. And I believe the Kardashians perform already in a few different ways, which I'll be talking about today, to really start to lay that foundation for their posthumous careers through archiving, self-preservation, and nostalgia. And through this acceleration of technology and in turn digital culture, it means that we have at our fingertips the ability to curate, observe, and archive our personal histories in ways that are almost incomprehensible to previous generations. For all of us, social media is a digital collective memory bank where we curate our lives for others to see. And these images on social media can affect our perception of the world, creating a space of hyperreality where the representation of something starts to replace the thing that they're representing. And this representation starts to become the real. And when we think of social media, it's really cyclical in the way that we shape it, and in turn, it shapes us. And our distinction of what is real and what is constructed starts to collapse, and in it, so does time. And we see that in how we can go on Instagram and see what someone is doing this second, face to face with them on a live video, or yesterday, or even back into the real depths of the past, jumping between years instantly. Online life is not solely, time is not solely linear, it's loose and it's fluid. And in the space of hyperreality, the way the Kardashians control and play with time is a huge part of their success. And it really allows them to write and rewrite the narratives, be perceived how they want to be perceived. And it also helps to establish a foundation for their careers posthumously. With so much content and existing in this space of hyperreality, it can be reused, recontextualized, and re-represented indefinitely. I think it's interesting to also think contextually, when the show first aired back in 2007, technology and digital culture looked very different. Twitter had just launched in 2006. Instagram was still yet to launch for another 3 years in 2010. And it was really a time when the tabloid press ruled and could easily influence people's opinions. And the show was really a way for them to tell their side of the story. But now celebrities and influencers talk directly to their fans, and it starts to feel slightly disjointed, the show in an instantaneous world of social media. Kim is now omnipresent. She exists in our pockets. She exists in our lives. She goes across country and time zone instantaneously. In Culture, Celebrity and the Cemetery, Hollywood Forever, Linda Levitt states that when the past is especially personal and accessible, it changes relationship with memory and history. As individuals engage in these archival activities, they mark new territories in the relationship between personal memory and cultural memory. And in the act of filming the show, their personal memories become stitched into this wider cultural discourse that the viewer, us, are a part of. And in episode 12, season 20, The End, we see Kim visiting her personal archive and going through the contents. Just her calling an archive and not a storage unit or a collection feels really bound in power and significance, like the authority of a museum collection, where the contents are worthy of being stored and preserved. And these pieces are part of history and cultural memory, and they will be indefinitely. And I've put this image of the Anna Wintour Costume Center archive that's from the Met Museum, because I thought it was culturally relevant to talk about it now, but also I think it's interesting just to see like how these kind of spaces of authority like museums start storing their archives, and how obviously Kim is starting to emulate this. And Tate Papers wrote an article called Negotiating the Archive, which says that at a time when we both crave and feel overwhelmed by information, the archive can seem like a more authoritative and somehow more authentic body of information or of objects bearing value and meaning. And the Kardashians are constantly grappling with this idea of the real, the authentic, and an archive really feels like a way to solidify that. As with everything, it's dictated and curated within their rules. The pieces are archived and wrapped in plastic in this act of like preservation, in the same way that they undergo plastic surgery to self-preserve. They each will have a reference image attached from photo shoots in the Met Gala. And Kim says, the fun part is I keep everything, all for memories. Even when Kanye thought he'd clean out my closet, I kept it secretly for my daughter one day. And in a Snapchat video, she shows us her other archive. I'm hoping that the video will play and that you'll be able to hear it.
Can you turn it up, Ruby?
That could put, I'm not entirely sure if I can get it any louder than that, but basically in this video, she says to us, do you remember me wearing this? As if her memory isn't just her own, but it's also ours as well. Really blurring those lines between personal and cultural memory there. It's also interesting because she leans very heavily on this fact that all these items have only been worn once. And at the end of this video, she says, the best stuff is the stuff I've never worn. And here it all is at the end of this rail. And it's almost like the impossibility of it, that even though we've seen all these iconic pieces, whatever you've seen before, there were things that were more memorable. And her clothing archive really has a keep everything approach without much curation. And I think that speaks to both the fear of getting rid of something and then it being deemed later as important, but obviously she also has an enormous amount of wealth, so she has the ability to save and keep all of these things. And obviously her archive expands beyond clothing to film footage, photographs, selfies, and selfie books. And her agency over all of this and her ownership over her own image is integral as a way of sustaining her brand. And we see this when Kim starts to intersperse these older photos amongst new ones on Instagram, or how the show reflects past experiences presented as current, giving them the power to kind of remain undefined, to flick between months and years, and to write their own personal histories and timelines. And as personal and cultural memory blurs, in Memorial Mania, Erica Doss writes, by sifting through both personal and cultural memories, individuals work to create a narrative of a world they wish to belong to, while also remaking or choosing to ignore the stories and images that conflict with that desired worldview. And I think it's interesting when we start to think about what happens when you can't write that narrative and when that element of strict curation is outside of your control. And I think it's when we think about death, it's also really interesting to think about other examples that have existed within Kim's life that we can start kind of thinking around. And I think the Paris robbery that happened in 2017 for Kim was a type of death. It was obviously highly traumatic, but it was also the death of the way she lived, the death of that, like being that visible online. And in this state of hyperreality that they exist in, when something happens outside of this highly curated space, it almost feels like an impossibility. And when we think back to it, there was an overwhelming discourse from the media that was that it was a construction, that it was purely for content. The robbery itself obviously was a death of sorts, and Kim stopped posting on Instagram and stepped back from the limelight as if to distance herself from visibility and wealth that kind of made her a target. And when she returned to Instagram 3 months later, she posted these images that appear intimate. Her family home that looks kind of unlike the one that we know, and they all have this real high grain filter on them. The family are doing things that appear normal, eating cereal, lounging on the sofa, playing. Despite the high level of noise on the images, they do feel quite quiet and quite relaxed. In the social photo on photography and social media, Nathan Jurgensen states that the rise in Disneyfication of spaces has led to this obsession with decay and search for an authentic reality in an overstimulated world, and that sharing faux vintage, grainy photos has conjured a sense of special realness. Photos placed oneself and one's digitally mediated present into the context of the past and its overtones of the authentic, the important, and the real. And it's interesting referring to this Disneyfication because obviously that is like the space of simulation, and it really sits in the opposition of authenticity. And it's interesting that Kim is grasping onto these more like seemingly real elements of her life, but in this context, with this filter used, it also kind of appears more unreal because it's so different from how we see her and how we perceive her. And when we start to think about nostalgia for the present, and also the idea of these like folding timelines that happens within social media, I think a great example of it is obviously Kim's 40th birthday party. And Robert Kardashian Sr. couldn't have predicted the life that they would have, but through him, he's instilled this awareness of being observed. And I'm sure many people grew up in family home movies, but as Kim stated in her birthday Instagram post, my dad videotaped and documented our whole lives. And there's this element of performance, surveillance, and entertainment ingrained in their lives. These childhood memories are seen as real memories, and they're used throughout the show to harness feelings of nostalgia. If there were levels to authenticity, these are seen as like pure and real. And not only that, by looking at the past, they position themselves as the image of success for the American dream, despite being wealthy prior to their current level of fame and influence. And when I originally saw the images of Kim's 40th birthday party, I really thought it looked like an exhibition, like an artist retrospective. Her life's work projected on the wall like paintings at a saloon hang. But on reading the caption on her Instagram post, it sounds more like a film set, an uncanny space outside of time. And I've blown up the caption here because I just think it's so interesting to look at how she's like started writing it and how she really like leans into this idea of it being the most epic, the most special. I've definitely come full circle from the past to the present, and this real lean into this idea of recreation. She says they recreated all of my special birthdays throughout my life. From looking at our old home videos, they recreated the party, the same balloons, the same cake, everything. They did the exact dance they did for me when I was 10. And beyond the hyper real, the reconstruction of the real or the perceived real of memories they may only know through watching these videos. They were quite young when she talks about her first and second birthdays. It's what has already been, and it's once again playing out in front of her and pulling these memories from the past to the present, ready to share with us on the show in the future. Memories within memories. It feels like the hyper real, even more hyper. And when they start to conduct themselves in a space in which reality is dead and we're in a state of hyper reality, they're just in control of everything that's happening. And in the episode Tales from the Kardashian Crypt, the family visit Hollywood Forever Cemetery in LA, famed for its burials of Judy Garland, Johnny Ramone, Mel Blanc, just to name a few. And it's interesting because obviously they have such a huge obsession with this idea of old Hollywood, of glamour, and they use this episode as a way of discussing their death and burial. And it creates this thing called a safe morbid space, a term coined by Ruth Penfold Mance, which is used to reference a space where you can openly consider and consume death and the dead. And for us, it becomes this space that also allows us to ask these questions of our own lives, thus taking something that was of personal memory to them and bringing it more to cultural memory once again. When they're opening up this space to share these ideas and concerns and also confront death as a family. And I think it's interesting, obviously, the logo of Hollywood Forever, a massive infinity symbol, this idea of the infinite existence, even after death. And when walking the site, Chloe states that they should have a drawbridge that raises from the lake so that nobody can steal our bodies ever. A joke, some may say, but it also shows the value their bodies have as part of their brand and their personhood. Obviously, no one wants their body stolen in death, but it was interesting to me that that was her immediate thought. And it really shows that value they put on their bodies as spaces to generate capital and to show their personhood. And through their archive, they can exist digitally without their body. And although Kim's brand is so body-led, she's obviously expanding and has been for many years. This her as an avatar, as a digital avatar through Kim Kardashian Hollywood, and obviously her new foray into voice acting in film and TV, where she can exist outside of her body but still be recognizable. And through their archive, they can exist and if we start to think about death as a journey to something beyond life, we can start to think about the space it opens up for celebrities to have posthumous careers and agency over them even in death. And as I said in my introduction, the deaf do not have the ability to generate capital. This is not strictly true. Death to some people can be highly lucrative. For example, Marilyn Monroe is known as the most alive dead person in history, rivaled only by Princess Diana. And then when we think about other celebrities such as Michael Jackson, he's been #1 highest earning dead person for every year since his death. So what does this mean for their afterlife? They already live outside the real, and through their agency over their own content, they have a foundation for really being able to build on this and to use this within their afterlife. In this state of constant nostalgia, the past and present is in flux. Like the dead, they are suspended in time. And the death industry is evolving to encompass digital afterlives, knowing that in digital culture, which can capture a person's real multitudes, a gravestone with love by many, or a man of tender heart and generous spirit, as with Robert Kardashian Sr., there is maybe that is not enough to convey the real multitudes that a person has. And along with that desire to not be forgotten and to count the real main characterness that is coming through in social media, we're starting to see new ways of having more online tributes, such as the actual Hollywood Forever Cemetery has now been doing these forever tributes, which are more of an audio-visual representation of the dead. And the idea of the ownership of your rights and your image being used or not, we see actors like Robin Williams, who's blocked the use of his image for 25 years since his death. And I think for them, one complication is in the active preservation in the face of the changing digital landscape, the constant upkeep of digital files, backups, and storage. Perhaps not a problem for people with so much wealth, but as they accumulate more and more objects, files, memories, it really could be, and I know it's such a frustrating thing when you yourself cannot back up things or you lose a hard drive, and it'll be interesting to see how they can continue to kind of preserve these older digital files going forward. And in the Hollywood Forever episode, they talk about this family mausoleum. And for someone that is so online, it almost feels disingenuous to have a final resting place, as if she's bound to this singular existence. However, I feel like it would offer a real opportunity for fan pilgrimage and a space to gather and to celebrate, and could be something multi-layered, almost her Magic Kingdom moment that you sort of an experience that you turn up at and explore, and you really seek it out. And then if we think back to last year and how the Robert Kardashian Sr. hologram was created from a lot of grainy archive footage, we can only really speculate what this could look like and how they could be moving this into the future. And I'm sure, like most industries they've been a part of, they'll be making a profit. Who knows, maybe we'll still see a comeback of memorialbelia. Kim's already shown that she can access this idea of maybe the death mask or the collectible urn element. And whatever happens, I'm sure that for them, death will only be the beginning.
Wow. Fantastic, Ruby. Thank you so much. That was just thrilling. And I have a million questions and comments and probably could talk to you for several hours about that, but I'll leave it for question time. I hope other people have got lots to say as well. But right now we're going to move straight on to our next session, which is JESSA FAITHFULL. And this paper is called Kardashians and the Myth of Maternity. So JESSA FAITHFULL has an MA in Peace and Conflict from the University of Sydney. She's also a youth worker, a researcher, and of course, an avid watcher of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Their current academic focus is on applying conflict theories and mapping techniques to social debates around maternity, pregnancy, reproductive health, and abortion. The Kardashians' complex relationships with motherhood, womanhood, innocence, and sexuality have provided great inspiration for Jess's academic life. But they've also inspired many conversations about feminism and critical thought with the young people whom she works alongside. So I'm going to hand over to Jessa and or to Seb, depending on technology.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Meredith. And Ruby, that's a really tough act to follow, but I'm going to do my best.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessa. I'm really excited to be sharing some of my research around the maternity myth with you. I'd like to acknowledge I'm speaking to you from the sovereign Gadigal land of the Eora Nation in Sydney, Australia, and recognise that sovereignty over this land was never ceded. The first thing that I would like to note is that I'm going to be saying some lightly scathing things about the ways our society cons uterus owners into choosing to raise children. I recognise that everyone's personal journey into parenthood is different, and all are valid and deserving of community support. My intention in unpacking this is to highlight the structural violence that many of us face when we try to exert agency on this topic. But if it helps, you're more than welcome to frame this as me being single, childless, and in a committed relationship with my IUD. The other thing that I would like to note is that where research is my own, I use gender-neutral terms to discuss pregnant people and people who can carry children. If I'm citing other academics or referring to specific individuals, I will use the language that reflects that. As a queer person in the field of reproductive justice, I know that this is an uphill battle, and I'd like to apologise if the gendered elements of this presentation are in any way distressing. So, while the term parasocial has been around for a really long time, it's gotten immensely popular recently. It describes situations where viewers develop notions of intimacy and identification in response to portrayals of strangers, celebrities, social media figures, through a one-sided medium or non-reciprocal medium such as television and social media. We often talk about this within the context of social media addiction, with implications that these dynamics are inherently unhealthy or manipulative. And while I know they absolutely can be, I also conceive of parasocial relationships as an opportunity for viewers to explore complicated social conflicts without great personal risk in the context of a simulation, and to do this while forming ties to a collective of other viewers from many walks of life. As my research primarily focuses on the conflicts that emerge around reproductive justice and agency, today we will use the Kardashians as a way to explore these themes. So, reproductive bodies, those that are able to carry and birth children, are an intersection, the meeting point between an individual, their hopes, dreams, and desires, and the needs of the state or community, namely the need for more humans to be born, to exist within society, and of course, to serve capitalism. Judith Butler describes our bodies as the way our private selves take physical form, forcibly materialized through time. People with uteruses exercising agency over their bodies is an implicit threat to this weird primal need that we collectively harbour to sustain humanity's presence on Earth. All reproductive bodies are influenced by this imperative, as well as the imperative of survival under capitalism. These two act in opposition, and any person who tries to exist or survive in both worlds will inevitably suffer in at least one of them. And even the Kardashians are not immune from this. During the 20th century, in particular, massive social upheavals, coming loosely under the umbrellas of women's lib and civil rights, exacerbated these primal anxieties around the role of reproductive humans in both family and society. Motherhood, in the most traditional Western sense, comprised of marriage, multiple pregnancies, and full-time unpaid domestic labour, suddenly had some competition, as we were presented with new ways to seek fulfillment outside of the home and family. It's critical to note that while for a small number of people these were genuinely opportunities, for many they were simply additional pressures. And our cultural response to these anxieties about the collapse of the nuclear family was to develop elaborate mythologies around the role of the wife and mother. Think of your typical 1950s housewife. These ideals became part of the fabric of society, and they center on really dark themes, with an unspoken narrative that emphasizes suffering, sacrifice. Mothers are patient, they're tireless, and they're martyrs for collective causes. To encourage young people to actively choose this, regardless of whether it suits their needs, the reality needs to be sugar-coated and disseminated through every channel imaginable. Incentives and cliches are whispered in soothing tones. Yes, it will hurt, but the pain will be worth it. You will fulfill your unmet needs, you'll be adored, admired, loved, and you'll never be alone. All those bad relationships, all those questionable romantic antics and one-night stands, we'll wipe the slate totally clean, we promise. And to really sell the idea, there is a stick to go with the carrot, in that reproductive humans who choose not to participate in this mythology are profoundly othered. As their bodies are valued primarily for reproductive labour, failing to participate also results in various degrees of dehumanization, ranging from pity all the way through to revulsion. So how do the Kardashians navigate these competing pressures? Individually and collectively, they've built empires, created a lot of children, and already left an indelible legacy. Beyond being extremely wealthy, which helps, one of the key strategies is their revival of the matriarchy. The Kardashians have completely redesigned the family unit to center on mothers as not only providers, but leaders and decision makers. So supplemented by an army of nannies and domestic staff, their approach to child rearing in particular is deeply collective and collaborative. Whether out of necessity or preference, the re-emergence of a true matriarchy in such a visible way is extremely clever. This is an effective challenge to patriarchy primarily because it derives its legitimacy from presenting the members as hyperfeminine. These are women doing the best they can for their little ones and their wayward husbands, not hostile, bra-burning man-haters. They're an acceptable threat, and I'm continually impressed by their soft power strategies. The devil works hard, but Kris Jenner works harder. Which brings me to our fathers. The Kardashians ebb and flow in relation to their co-parents, but without exception, when it comes to the family unit, the fathers perform a secondary leadership and pastoral role. All of the fathers in this clan share an almost comical capacity for chaos, and one of the interesting things about the so-called Kardashian curse is that it once again places responsibility for male bad behavior onto female partners. The other interesting thing is how carefully the group navigate these dynamics publicly. Occasionally, we get to see female rage. Think Kourtney throwing Scott's clothes over the staircase, or Kim jokingly making throat-slitting gestures behind Tristan's back. But these are few and far between. As Kim said, citing MJ Corey, of course, calmness is her superpower. And in the current era of the Kardashian brand, they've understood the message that angry, uncontrolled women are unmarketable. And as such, they hold themselves to a higher standard than the men around them, treating them as tedious but necessary components of having it all, who must be handled gently. As such, even when Tristan crossed multiple boundaries and raised red flag after red flag, we saw Khloe head back into the ring for round 2 of fertility treatment with him at the beginning of season 20. It's better the devil you know, and all that. So I tried to make my little video work and it failed miserably. You will have to accept this meager screenshot instead. When Khloe narrates her childbirth experience, she says, "I want Tristan here with me, and I want to experience that magical moment for me and for my daughter and for him. I am mature enough to put my feelings aside for this." So to me, this embodies not necessarily grace or self-assurance, but a commitment to the idea that no amount of disloyalty or harm compromises the sanctity or romanticism of yeeting a small human out of your body, surrounded by your entire family and a camera crew. As Khloe becomes a mother, there's a paradigm shift, and she has no choice but to embody specific traits: patience, devotion, forgiveness. On a parasocial note, the family's relationships with their romantic partners serve as a curated concession to their humanity, reminding us that even professionally hot millionaires get played. So Peterson wrote that the sense of the pregnant body as abject goes back millennia. The pregnant body is a woman's body at its most fecund, but also in its most grotesque configuration. The body swells, expands, and oozes. The boundary between inside and outside is permeable. The emergence of visibly pregnant celebrities in the 1990s challenged the idea that pregnancy was something repulsive and better kept secret. But there are, of course, conditions. For your celebrity pregnancy to be welcomed by the masses, you must grow only around your belly. You must be serene, doe-eyed, and excited. Above all else, you have to glow. And while Kim may have truly intended to do all of these things when she became pregnant with her first child, North, in 2013, her body and biology had other ideas. She was swollen, sick, anxious, and uncomfortable, and the backlash was astounding. To again quote Peterson, "In transgressing the boundaries of the cute celebrity pregnancy, Kardashian effectively called attention to the constrictive, regressive norms of how women, celebrity or not, are now expected to perform pregnancy." Kim was tormented because she was unable to participate in selling the new myth. Most notably, the infamous couch dress at the 2013 Met Gala, which almost broke the internet. By contrast, her sister Court, who's pictured here pregnant with Mason in 2009, was on this Life and Style cover. Her brand entirely centers around being able to embody modern motherhood. And Court's website, Poosh, frequently shares articles citing her pregnancy secrets, coincidentally selling a wide range of products implicitly guaranteed to make sure you're glowing like Demi Moore. Her recent foray into a newer, more rebellious image is a marked departure from this, but it's perfectly timed to coincide with a point in her motherhood journey where, as her children grow older, her sense of self is allowed greater care and visibility. Kourtney's second adolescence is only permitted because we've already accepted the premise that she is first and foremost a mother figure. Nonetheless, her new aesthetic has been derided by many as a tragic attempt to maintain relevance. You really can't win. But let's look at Kim's transition from sex tape celeb to married mother of 4. As a millennial, I've been lectured since adolescence about the permanence of the internet and the irreversibility of a bad reputation. But everything we think we know about the fallen woman has to be completely and utterly thrown out the window when we look to Kim. While her pregnancy was unable to conform to rigid expectations, her commitment to her new role as mother was readily embraced. While there are still overtly sexualized elements to the Kim Kardashian brand, her overall tone is far more muted, and the emphasis is more on her being womanly, fertile, even nurturing, and, I would argue, more private. I think of this primarily as recognition of the maternity myth, with a few twists on the theme that pay homage to her agency and her complexity, such as conversations around her use of surrogates, her pursuit of her law degree, maintaining that semi-provocative public image, and the new redirection of her brand in a possibly post-Kanye era. There were so many people who were eager to hold this sex tape and her earlier, tackier branding over her head, and those efforts seem totally futile now. By incorporating elements of traditional femininity and motherhood into her life and persona, I believe that Kim has fulfilled the previously unthinkable blending of the Madonna and whore archetypes. It's also possible to conceive of this evolution along the lines of Baudrillard's stages of simulacra and simulation, whereby her current image would fall under the 3rd stage, the order of sorcery. And she knows exactly what she's doing too. Do you remember these? Yeah, so here we have Kimberly wearing a sheer Dolce & Gabbana dress, the Virgin Mary embroidered on her tatas, and a saint's candle she sold in 2013 where she herself is the Blessed Virgin holding the Sacred Heart. So I really truly believe that Kim has read John Berger, and her understanding of herself through the eyes of the masses is superb. It's the product of years of hard work. So initially, when it was profitable for her to toy with this hypersexualized image, when there was novelty associated with the brand and subsequently profit, she was more than happy to do so. But we've become desensitized to a lot of mainstream sexual imagery, and the market for that is saturated. Beyond that, economic and political turmoil have predictably led to a weird nostalgic pining for a softer, more polished brand of female success that not only aligns with girl boss millennial feminism, but can be bought and tangibly replicated in our own lives. While her professional brand is truly polished, in ode to her reality TV origins, she understands that we also love to see her fall apart. While we might not get the ugly crying face again anytime soon, we now get to revel in North's scathing commentary as Kim tries to engage with us on social media. And that curated relatability with a very maternal lens gives Kim safety and protection as she embarks on potentially even more ambitious projects. If she's playing by most of the rules, there's scope for her to break the ones that she finds the most stifling. Her careful navigation of these two imperatives leaves us with no choice but to recognize her as really powerful and incredibly multifaceted, and I think that makes a lot of people very angry. So, Addison's appearance on season 20 is where I really realized Kim's dedication to the mother rebrand and how she understands that the rules for her now as a married woman with 4 children are markedly different to those that apply to Addison, especially when it comes to performing sexuality, specifically the WAP dance. And she says, it's like super hoey. I want to be more cutie. No, you can do it because you're not married. And coming from the icon who gave us the line, I've done Molly twice in my life, the first time I got married, the second I made a sex tape, we can clearly see her understanding of this narrative of purity and redemption that she's willing to perform, especially as she married a highly religious man and had 4 children. Whether she is actually buying into it or not, we will never really know. All we can say for sure is that Kim understands the rules and knows exactly what she needs to be in every public moment. So, culturally transmitted mythologies of rapturous motherhood subsidize a blithe refusal to reflect on the realities. This quote to me embodies the Kardashians' ability to disconnect from the ordinary struggles of normal mothers by making motherhood part of their brand and business. And this is a privilege of the mega wealthy. Ultimately, their ability to navigate these tensions of capitalism and the reproductive imperative are a direct product of their economic exceptionalism. They're not necessarily a beacon of what ordinary people should expect when navigating these same junctions. Instead, they are a very good indicator of what the new unrealistic expectations placed on us around pregnancy, childrearing, co-parenting, and sexuality are going to be. The Kardashians ultimately are here to change their lives, not ours, and to believe otherwise is foolish, if not kind of dangerous. From a Skims line for kids to Kendall's tequila brand, the things that they sell us are a product of the images they cultivate in relation to the myths of womanhood and motherhood. The Kardashian method, therefore, is impossible to replicate because it derives success by exploiting imbalances of wealth and power and does nothing to correct them. The only way that I can conceive reducing the tension between personal and collective needs or reproductive and economic pressures is to create an environment where everyone's basic needs are met without needing to conform to or tolerate tiresome gendered archetypes. And there is, of course, a small chance that this is secretly the Kardashian endgame, but I, for one, am not holding my breath. So to finally circle back to parasociality, our relationships with the Kardashians and others like them are a form of escapism, creating a landscape on which we can explore these massive cultural ideas with a little bit of distance and humor. While our lives are nothing like theirs, we can nonetheless derive immense value from engaging with them critically, or simply escaping reality for a hot second to marvel at the absurdity of their lives. So thank you so much for listening. I'd like to also thank Meredith and the incredible Kimposium team for creating a space like this one that really challenges the elitism and misogyny of a lot of mainstream academia. Thank you for letting us unleash our critical skills on these worthy and compelling subjects.
Thank you so much, Jessa, and thank you for the thank you. That makes me feel very happy that I've done that. Wow, what two incredible papers about birth, death, immortality, archives, pregnancy, the future, the past. We really covered absolutely everything there. Can we have hands up and or questions for Jessa or Ruby, or general chat? Let me see, there's stuff. Yeah, we're just getting we had lots of chat while you were both speaking. Fantastic presentations. Yeah, two really, really outstanding. Well done, both of you.
Jessa, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see Kendall fitting into the whole maternity myth as the only one without any kids.
Oh my God, I'm so glad you asked this because I had a slide on her, but I had to cut something because of time. So I think that any idea that Kendall is deliberately or intentionally rejecting the maternity myth is kind of implausible. When D.T. Myers talks about pregnancy and people kind of in the age range of like 25 to 35 deciding whether pregnancy is something that suits them, you have three main categories. And so you have kind of the Kool-Aid drinkers who have internalized the mythology really young and believe motherhood to be a really big part of your identity. You have the reactionaries, which usually accompanies like maybe like more corporate focused people, or people who derive fulfillment from other areas of their life really distinctly, and who are like, not for me. But most young people sit in the middle, and they sit in this kind of wasteland where they recognize the discomfort associated with those decisions and that pathway, but they don't necessarily have the sense of self to be able to articulate it. And for me, Kendall is absolutely one of those people. I don't see her as an especially strong influence in the family. I don't think she holds a leadership position within the clan. She is, although like Kylie's younger than her, she's the baby in terms of her ability to articulate her path. And that's why she clings so much to her identity as a self-made supermodel. So I think we will eventually see her also succumb to the same fate as her sisters. And as a queer person, I have to like fight the urge to maybe over-identify with her and project that element of my identity onto her decisions not to have kids. But also she's 25 and she lives in Hollywood. Like the idea that her lack of a parental like experience is somehow absurd is in itself ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
On Kendall, I noticed there was she was given a sort of apprenticeship in motherhood in the last season.
Yeah.
And I did, and on queerness, I got really excited when Chris made that announcement that Kendall had a big announcement.
The proactive.
Yeah, I thought, oh, she's
I thought the same thing.
No, she had acne.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like, no, this is it. We're getting a gay Kardashian. Like, this is what we deserve as a community. No.
But with all those children, there has to be a gay one. Or the grandchildren, I mean.
Statistically, we'll get a couple. We just have to be patient.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, I've got a question for Ruby. You mentioned that the trauma, Kim's kidnapping, well, maybe it was kidnapping, wasn't it, officially? What happened to her in Paris was a kind of death. And I've wondered for a long time and sort of been waiting for someone to write about the deaths that this family and Kim in particular experienced as children. So not just the death of her father, not just the death of Nicole Brown, and that was actually a vicious murder, a domestic violence murder of a woman, but also the death of Dee Dee Jackson, who was the mother of her teenage boyfriend, who's one of the Jackson children. I'm not asking you to necessarily give us some answers about this, but just that those parts of the history of the Kardashians are almost swept under the carpet. We get the dad in this sort of glamorized hagiographic form, but those other earlier really brutal gender-based murders are never mentioned.
I think that's really interesting. And actually, I was going to include an image of Kim. There was an image she posted on Snapchat, which is her very close up with a necklace that was owned by Nicole. And it's like, R.I.P. Nicole, I love the necklace. And I think that's super interesting how, especially the connection between Nicole and obviously Robert Kardashian, the two sides of the case there, where you had obviously Chris in the courtroom sitting on one side with the children and Robert Kardashian on the other. And I think there has been like a very interesting, like, death is definitely something that has followed them throughout their lives, and this kind of idea of tragedy. And it's interesting, as you said, like, it's not something they generally confront on the show. And I don't know if they feel like the narrative is not their own to convey. When you look at Kris Jenner's book, she talks a lot about Nicole's death in that. And actually, she released a cookbook afterwards where she used Nicole's lasagna recipe and published it. So I feel like they have a very strange way of accessing and sharing those aspects of death. And I wonder if it is just because they don't have the authority to speak on it in the same way they have an authority to speak on the death of their father. They had that whole episode in season 1 called Remembering Dad, and I feel like Rob Kardashian is the specter of death. He kind of is always there throughout their lives and throughout the show. I wonder also whether the Nicole death is obviously as you said, it's highly controversial in terms of like the OJ side of it, and that kind of narrative that keeps coming through of like Chloe and OJ and the questions of parentalhood and things like that. And I wonder if they just distance themselves from that aspect because they can't have agency on it. But yeah, it's super interesting.
Yeah, I think we could put together a whole book or a whole edited volume about just aspects of death and the Kardashians. We've got a question from Steph.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, so I just had a question about the Robert Kardashian hologram, and kind of I think whether kind of Ruby had any thoughts on Kanye creating the hologram for Kim, but then not choosing to create one for his mother Donda. So obviously the Donda album came out, and I saw on Twitter everyone was like, there'll be a hologram of Donda. So why is it, do you think, that a hologram suits the Kardashian world, but maybe freaks out other people and doesn't fit in any other world? Like, why is it that it suits that family?
Thanks, Steph, for your question. I just also want to say I loved your talk yesterday. Thought it was so great. So it's nice to see you in this too. I think it suits the Kardashians so well because they're so versed in that visual world, and they're so versed in video and image as also text as well. And I think they convey so much of their lives through the medium of video that for them it kind of just makes sense. And I think as we see Kim kind of straddling these aspects of the real, the hyper real, the unreal, but also like there are questions whether even at the Met Gala, whether that was her there. I think it makes a lot of sense for Robert Kardashian to appear in this kind of almost real, not real world, because it fits so well into their kind of narrative as well. And it's interesting when we think about Kanye and especially Donda, and I think even in the last, when he released Life of Pablo, and he was also doing like a stadium listening release, and there was like clip of like the game that he was making of Donda, and even in that he didn't convey his mother's face or any kind of, it was this almost not even an apparition, it was like floating above the clouds in a way that's kind of abstracted. I wonder if that is also linked to kind of his relationship to Christianity, relationship of like depicting, because he's never really depicted himself as Jesus, yet it calls himself Jesus, and has the idea that he is a god, but never depicts himself in that realm of being godlike. And if we think to like JESSA's talk and how she showed Kim as the Virgin Mary, Kim is very like linked to that iconography element. But I feel like Kanye as like a devout Christian, and the idea of like never representing yourself as a god, he calls himself a god, but he doesn't like embody that in imagery or iconography, where he could quite easily do that as quite a very like simple way of connecting us, the viewer, to it. And I wonder if it's also just because he has a very complicated relationship with his mother, and I think that comes through a lot in the album that just came out. And obviously there's a lot of questions around the people that he's asked to collaborate on it, and how a lot of people feel like maybe they're not the right people. And I think his relationship with Donda is maybe something that's he's never going to fully get into a stage where he's comfortable with even expressing that. And I think with the Kardashians and their like, and how much they really show those videos of their father, show his iconography, lean into it so much, it kind of makes sense. Kanye kind of stays away from those visual representations of his mom through anything. Like he didn't even use his mom's voice on the album called after her. A lot of people are still like, that's quite bizarre. Yeah, it's a really interesting one, definitely.
I don't want to like take all complicated men and drag them back to mommy issues necessarily, but in this case, I think my understanding of the relationship with Donda compared to Rob and the girls is very much that Donda is his, and she is this like sacred other that guides his life and his journey and his relationship with the Lord, and the way the public gets to consume her is on his terms and through him. He is like a protective figure of her divine feminine, whereas when we flip that gender of the bereaved children of a parent, Robert Senior, is there as a protector, and they can call on him and they can share him, they can disseminate him, and he was already a public figure as well, which I think means that it would be harder to keep him private simply because his name was known everywhere after the OJ trial. And I think, like you also pointed out in your presentation, Ruby, with that hyper documentation of the girls even before fame, he has taught them what it means to be on camera and to share their lives. So it's a natural way to honor his memory, to continue that legacy.
Yeah, definitely. That's such a great point.
Oh my goodness. Well, I feel like we could continue with this particular discussion probably for the rest of the day, but we have to move on. Thank you, Ruby and JESSA, so much for those brilliant presentations. And there's a lot of commentary in the chat, so do feel free to, you know, keep up parallel discussions in the chat. We can all multitask, you know, multitask. Okay, so I am about to introduce the next session. This is session 8, and it's all around the kimono scandal. Our first presenter is Jenny Hall. Hi, Jenny. And I'm going to introduce Jenny. Jenny's a research officer at the Japanese Cultural Centre at Monash University, which is in Melbourne, Australia. And her research is situated at the intersection of anthropology, Japanese studies, fashion and design studies, and also cultural heritage studies. She has a PhD in anthropology from Monash University, and her first book, Japan Beyond the Kimono, Tradition and Innovation in the Kyoto Textile Industry, was published in 2020. It's a sensory analysis, which sounds amazing. I'm going to order this book, of the design, production and consumption of contemporary Japanese apparel created using heritage industry techniques. So Jenny, please take it away, and I'm looking forward to your paper.
Thanks very much, Meredith. I acknowledge, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the lands of the Wurundjeri people, the traditional custodians of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Absolutely a really, really hard act to follow, those first 2 presentations today. And, okay, so yes, my talk is called Kim Kardashian's Kimono, so a very different topic from the first 2 talks today, and why we should care about cultural appropriation. So I thought I'd give you a brief overview of what I'm going to go through today. First of all, I'll talk about the incident, the announcement, and all of the fallout from Kim's announcement about kimono. And then I'll look at some definitions of cultural appropriation that I'm going to use, and why this might not be considered cultural appropriation, but why also I think it should be considered cultural appropriation. And then I will finish with some implications. Just see if I can put this away. Okay, so most of you will be aware of Kim's launch of her new underwear brand on Tuesday, the 25th of June, 2019, with the name Kimono Solution Wear. In addition to the name, she applied for 8 trademarks for the brand, including Kimono, Kimono Body, Kimono Intimates, and Kimono World. So the announcement quickly received a torrent of social media backlash under the hashtag #KimOhNo. First from Twitter users like BBC News editor Yuko Kato, who a day later posted, "Nice underwear, but as a Japanese woman who loves to wear our traditional dress, kimono, I find the naming of your products baffling, since it has no resemblance to kimono, if not outright culturally offensive, especially if it was merely a wordplay on your name. Please reconsider." And then 2 days after the announcement, a change.org petition was created by Sono Fukunishi, a Japanese woman living in Paris who promotes the wearing of kimono, which read, "Kim Kardashian West filed trademarks for Kimono Body, Kimono Intimates and Kimono World. She has trademarked a word of huge cultural significance in Japanese culture. As a Japanese person, I wear kimono every day, and I do not wish to share the word with an underwear brand. Kimono means clothing in Japanese. This is our culture, and I would like to show how many of us do not appreciate this. Please sign the petition, and together we will take action to change this horrible cultural disrespect." The petition gained more than 137,000 signatures, and Kim's announcement garnered criticism from many others speaking out on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. The criticism came from Japanese individuals, kimono designers, Japanese Americans, Asian Americans, and other kimono appreciation groups from around the world. They accused Kim of cultural appropriation. But on the flip side, during this period of outcry, there were also many tweets asking what the big deal was. On the 28th of June, only 3 days after the announcement, the mayor of Kyoto, Daisaku Kadogawa, who is well known for wearing kimono, released an official letter stating, "I ask you to reconsider your decision of using the name kimono in your trademark." Kim insisted that a trademark would not preclude or restrict anyone in this instance from making kimonos or using the word kimono in reference to the traditional garment. Kim responded to the accusations of cultural appropriation by telling the New York Times, "The name was meant to be a nod to the beauty and detail that goes into a garment. I have no plans to design or release any garments that would in any way resemble or dishonor the traditional garment. My solution brand is built with inclusivity and diversity at its core, and I'm incredibly proud of what's to come. I understand and have deep respect for the significance of the kimono in Japanese culture." About a week after the announcement, Kim caved to pressure, abandoned the name, and announced that she would relaunch under a different name. She finally relaunched it under the name Skims. Okay, so in this presentation, I want to examine this incident in the light of cultural appropriation. So I want to start with some definitions. One of the most often quoted is by James O. Young, who defined cultural appropriation as members of one culture, I will call them outsiders, take for their own or for their own use items produced by a member or members of another culture, call them insiders. And then a more recent definition by Leonard and Valent defines cultural appropriation as the appropriation of something of cultural value, usually a symbol or a practice to others. So if we take Young's definition about items taken for their own, Kim's branding and trademarking does not really fit with cultural appropriation. She is not taking items, in this case kimono, for her own purpose. If we compare it to other cases of cultural appropriation, we can see the differences. So in June 2021, Mexico accused international fashion brands Zara, Anthropologie, and Patel of cultural appropriation, claiming they used patterns from Indigenous groups in their designs without any benefit to those communities. They're clearly taking the design of items for their own, copying the designs, and selling them under their own names. Okay, great. Yeah, so you can see there the 3 items that Zara, Anthropologie, and Patel used, and that Mexico accused them of, accused them of cultural appropriation. Okay, so examining Kim's underwear garments, we can see that she's not trying to emulate or replicate kimono robes in any way. In fact, one of the biggest criticisms from social media was kimono is not underwear, highlighting one of the many differences highlighting one of the many differences between her products and kimono. So there are some really obvious differences and some similarities that are worth exploring in this regard to explain the significance of kimono for Japanese people and why they were upset about kimono being used being linked to solution wear. So the word kimono is an abbreviation of kirumono, which literally means things to wear, a thing to wear. But since the Meiji period, kimono has come to represent a much more specific garment, an ankle-length robe, the overall shape of which has remained static for centuries. It has an overlapping front, an attached neckband, and long rectangular sleeves, each made of a width of fabric joined at the sides, the length of which denotes marital status. There are 3 main features that affect a kimono's authenticity: the garment structure, the decorative composition and the mode of dress. There are more than 10 different pieces which must be put on in prescribed ways. Women who wish to wear kimono often attend training schools to be taught how to select and wear kimono, but also the etiquette involved in wearing kimono. And a kimono has such prescribed ways of wearing and symbolism attached to the structure, colours and composition that it's possible to read a kimono to ascertain certain things about the wearer. So it's obviously not underwear. And there are actually robes you can wear under a kimono, a kind of underwear for kimono, but these are not called kimono. They're called harajuban that you can see on the left there, the nagajuban in the center, and even a cotton summer kimono has a different name. It's called a yukata. So the word kimono is attached to a very specific garment. And in contemporary Japan, mostly wearing kimono is associated with special events, such as coming-of-age ceremonies, weddings, and New Year shrine visits. You could argue that Kim's shapewear is meant for special occasions as well, but it's also for everyday wear. But kimono is outerwear and meant to be seen, whereas shapewear is underwear and designed to be invisible. The shape that each promotes is also very different. Kim's shapewear is designed to promote her signature hourglass curves, but a kimono is, if it is worn in the contemporary mode that gained acceptance during the Meiji period, should appear cylindrical in shape, and this is called the zundo style. Both kimono and solution wear are designed to mold the body. Japanese-American poet and writer Mika Doyle stated in response to Kim's announcement that, and I quote, "It aligned my culture with a product made to make women feel like they need to fix their bodies, a message that is in complete opposition to the history and traditions of real kimonos." But I argue against this because, like shapewear, a kimono is used to mold the body. When a woman is dressed in a kimono, padding is added around the torso to create the desired flat and straight cylindrical effect, and it is strapped tightly so that the woman must take small steps, sit upright, and her movements are restricted. The desired effect is to constrain the body. A Kyoto designer told me, "You cannot ride a bicycle or drive a car while wearing a kimono." And anthropologist Ofra Goldstein-Guidoni, who has written about Japanese weddings in particular, noted, "The female body is not just constrained, more significantly, it is molded into a ready-made pattern, which is the model Japanese woman." So the aim is to instill something of the ideal Japanese woman encapsulated by the phrase ryosai kenbo, which means good wife, wise mother. The metamorphosis into a more beautiful, better executed version of themselves is similar to that of the beauty industry, or actually of the goals of Kim's solution wear and other products of hers. So if we take Young's initial definition of cultural appropriation as emulating a specific item, Kim's action doesn't appear to be cultural appropriation because she was not copying the item, only appropriating the word. But having detailed all of this information about kimono, we can see that the word kimono cannot be separated from a very specific item of Japanese culture. So kimono is, the word equals the item, if you like. And going back to Leonard and Balint's definition that cultural appropriation is the appropriation of something of cultural value, usually a symbol or a practice to others, we can therefore argue that it is cultural appropriation. And in Japan and internationally, the word kimono has become synonymous with Japan's national dress and is symbolic of this robe, its design, decoration, mode of wearing, and the associated meanings with Japanese identity. So Mika Doyle explains, and I quote, "For me and countless Japanese and Japanese American people, kimono isn't just a word. The garment is a piece of our histories and our identities that date back thousands of years. It's fabric that weaves the stories of our families, of our ancestors who came before us and paved the way for us to be who we are today. Leonard and Balint say there are two additional conditions which must be present to define an act of cultural appropriation: the presence of significant contestation around the act of appropriation, and the presence of knowledge or negligent culpability in the act of appropriation. So it's clear in this case that there was significant contestation, the outcry on social media and the mayor of Kyoto's letter to Kim asking her to reconsider her choice of name. The presence of knowledge or negligent culpability is harder to prove. The name Kimono was supposed to be a play on Kim's name, like her other brands Kimoji and KKW. In an interview, Kim said, "The name Skims is the perfect fit for the brand, and it resonated with me immediately. Of course, it incorporates my name, which is what I originally loved about kimono, but it also feels personal and literally close to one's skin." So it's easy to see why Kim chose the word, and she claimed that it was a nod to the traditional garment. But because kimono is symbolic of Japanese national dress and has multiple layers of meaning for Japanese people, I argue it can be seen as cultural appropriation, even though the brand was not emulating the garment. It's harder to prove whether or not Kim was aware of the significance of her choice. If this was merely a marketing ploy, it either went badly wrong or was successful in the bad publicity is good publicity kind of logic. We all know that outrage marketing is a viral marketing strategy these days. Being accused of cultural appropriation was not a new thing for Kim. For example, she's been accused by African Americans of cultural appropriation for wearing cornrows in her hair. So it's hard to believe that she wasn't aware of the implications. Oh, they haven't, oh yeah, okay. And this picture was actually just to show the numbers of followers. I think I took this slide towards the end of August, when she had 247 million followers on Instagram, 70 million on Twitter, and 33 million on Facebook. So plenty of brands use the word kimono to sell robe-like garments, but that don't particularly resemble traditional kimono. Kimono is often used for items supposedly inspired by Japanese clothing, but they are often more like parodies than any authentic representation. Hollywood is also often guilty of such caricatures regarding Asian representation. But Kim's kimono solution wear went a step further by completely disassociating the word from anything approximating its origins. Kim's appropriation of the word kimono for a line of products that have nothing to do with kimono is problematic because it removes the word from any cultural and historical contexts. By doing this, she ignores and erases Japanese traditional and cultural heritage. Such an action suggests that Japanese cultural identity and traditions have no value. They are simply fodder for the trends of fast fashion. And I'm not the only one who has come to such conclusions. Several in the media voiced concerns about the potential erasure of thousands of years of history and the idea that this could change people's ideas of what a kimono is. Yet Kim had voiced that she had deep respect for the significance of the kimono in Japanese culture. In addition, Kim said that by trademarking the words, she didn't intend to preclude or restrict anyone in this instance from making kimonos or using the word kimono in reference to the traditional garment. As far as I understand, this is true, that she would be trademarking the words in a particular font for her brand, and that according to trademark law, the word kimono could still be used in a descriptive capacity. So, for example, Gucci's silk kimono jacket. But there have been other cases where Australian brands have been sued, especially over UGG, or in Australia we call them UGG boots, or all the sheepskin sort of shoes. And they've been sued for exporting their products to the US because a company there trademarked UGG. So I don't think the case is so clear cut. And why would you trademark a word if not to protect and restrict its use? And also Japanese officials were worried enough for Trade Minister Hiroshige Seko to say that he would be sending officials for a meeting at the US Patent and Trademark Office on July 9th in 2019. So kimono as Japanese national dress is reasonably well known throughout the world, so perhaps it isn't such an issue in this particular case. Because the kimono is well known, it has a lot of advocates who can speak up for it. However, if this were a less well-known cultural item, such as the Mexican designs Zara, etc., tried to appropriate, or a less well-known Japanese garment, such as Monpei or Howdy, then it could be quite a different story. Kim has such influence that I believe it would be possible for her, by appropriating a word, to erase the original meaning of a cultural item. And it's this potential erasure or rewriting of cultural heritage that is why it's important to contest such cultural appropriation. So just to wrap up, I'd really be interested to hear others' thoughts on this, whether given Kim's international reach and the amount of followers she has, to what extent do you think this kind of cultural erasure is possible? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And I think we will definitely have more conversation about this, because we've got another paper now also about the kimono scandal, and we'll have lots of discussion afterwards. Thank you for that great paper, incredibly precise, and it's really good to have some really strict definitions of what cultural appropriation is, and then your analysis of that was really great. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Rebecca STEINER. Rebecca is a recent PhD in communications studies from the University of Georgia. Her research interests include organisational communication, popular culture, celebrity studies and health communication. And her research has already appeared in several journals, although she's only just finished her PhD. And she currently serves as a debate and dialogue specialist for the competitive debate team at Emory University. So handing over to Rebecca, and welcome Rebecca too.
Hello, and thank you to Meredith Jones for that introduction, and of course all the work that goes into planning an event like this one. Thank you to also the audience members who are tuning in really from time zones all over the world. I appreciate it. In my talk today, I would like to give a brief, but very brief background on the kimono scandal, because we already heard a great talk by Dr. Jenny Hall about the same scandal. I want to also talk about what were possible public relations approaches that Kim had in mind, which did she use, were they successful or not, and maybe what could have she done instead. So to give some sort of brief background on the scandal, very brief since it is the theme of the session, June 25th, 2019, that's when this scandal really originated. Kim Kardashian had chosen the name, announced the name of her new shapewear line as Kimono. And that was the name initially chosen, and she was very quickly accused of cultural appropriation, insensitivity towards Japanese culture. In addition to accusations of cultural appropriation, she was also accused of or faced backlash over the lack of diverse body types featured in the initial promotional imagery surrounding the brand. So there was a lot of backlash towards the announcement of not just the name, but of some of the products contained in the initial line too. And the scandal garnered a lot of attention among people who are big Kim Kardashian supporters, big enemies, and even Japanese government officials, where you heard about in the last talk, a mayor in Kyoto who made a personal appeal to Kim, asking her, please don't use this name for your brand. And also please visit Kyoto to understand why and to learn more about Japanese culture and how kimonos are used in our culture. And that letter was dated in June of 2019. And some of what that letter, it's very personalized, it's very much approved by the city of Kyoto, and it was written really quickly after the announcement, just 3 days later. So what was Kim's PR approach and what were the possible approaches? That's what I'm interested in. And I think that this scandal was a rhetorical situation that demanded a fitting response from Kim. She needed to pursue a public relations strategy to help overcome the scandal and restore her personal image as Kim Kardashian, but also the brand image for her clothing, for her shapewear line at the same time. So it had to be a multi-pronged approach to get not just her personal image back, but also the image of her brand as well. So when I researched the scandal, I put this scandal in conversation with image restoration theory. And for image restoration theory, typically a speaker or a person who's accused of wrongdoing really has 5 general options for how they can restore their own image after a scandal. And those are the 5 on the board. So before I talk about which ones I think that Kim chose or which ones might have been the most successful and why, I want to kind of talk about all of them to just give a survey of what the option choices were. So the first option choice would be denial. This would be when a person who's accused of wrongdoing just simply denies that the act occurred or that he or she committed it. And it may also shift the blame to somebody else in the process. So from, I'm going to shift the blame from myself to maybe somebody else, to that can be me denying my own responsibility. The second option choice would be to evade responsibility. That's when the person who is accused of a wrongdoing creates sort of an excuse. Maybe they had to do this in response to another prior wrongful act, or maybe they will plead a lack of information that led up to them making a choice, or maybe they could say, this was an accident, I didn't mean to. And those kinds of actions or excuses might reduce or absolve a speaker of responsibility, because some people are willing to forgive a wrongful act if it is done with good intentions. The third option would be called minimization, and this one's the most complicated because there are so many choices that one can take to minimize a wrongful act that you're accused of. So the first choice would be to try to reduce the perceived offensiveness of the act that you're accused of. A person who's accused sort of misbehavior might try to reduce the degree of ill that is associated with the act, like this is not a big deal, or in other words, try to justify what they've done as acceptable. Another option would be bolstering. That's kind of when a speaker will try to mitigate the effects of the act by strengthening how the audience perceives you, the person in question. So it might be possible to minimize the perceived offensiveness of the act if you are a credible person and really play up that piece. Third, an actor might choose to employ transcendence, where you try to place the wrongful act people are accusing you of in a larger, more desirable context. And it's possible within that you might attack the person or persons who are accusing you and turn the attack on them, suggesting they sort of deserved what happened to them, that you did wrong, and that may lessen the impact of the attack. And then another option within minimization is called compensation, where the person who's accused of a wrongdoing may try to offer some sort of positive reinforcement like cash, goods, other sort of services or settlements to help offset the negative impact that they had. And fourth option for possible public relations approaches is called corrective action, where the person who's accused of any sort of wrongdoing can offer a corrective for repairing the damage that they caused. And then lastly is mortification, where the person accused of doing something wrong might admit what they did was wrong and ask for forgiveness. So the closest thing to an apology or a concession, and they might include expressions of regret for their role in doing something offensive and accept the consequences and request forgiveness for the people that were affected by their offensive act. So out of those 5 strategies, with those in mind, which of these did Kim choose after her scandal, after the initial naming of the shapewear brand? I think that mostly the strategies chosen will fall into the category of corrective action, mortification, and some evading responsibility. So for corrective action in July of 2019, so a couple days after she had announced the name, she tweeted on July 1st, which is actually just 6 days after she'd announced the name brand. She said, "My brands and products are built with inclusivity and diversity at their core, and after careful thought and consideration, I will be launching my solution wear brand under a new name. I'll be in touch soon. Thank you for your understanding and support always." And she continued that tweet with the second one, also on July 1st, that said, "I'm always listening, learning, and growing. I so appreciate the passion and the varied perspectives that people bring me. When I announced the name of my shapewear brand, I did so with the best intentions in mind." So it's a little bit of evading responsibility that I did this, but I did it with the best intentions in mind, please forgive me, type of approach. So corrective action, she announced that one of the correctives to repair the damage she'd caused is that she's going to change the name of the brand. She agrees it's not a sensitive approach culturally, and she's going to change it. And on July 8th, she begins soliciting feedback also through Twitter of possible new names for the brand. She said, we haven't renamed it, but do you guys like the name Solution Wear? Any other names that you're liking? And 715,000 people retweeted that and started to join the conversation. And then in August of 2019, she announced that she would be changing the brand's name to Skims and announced a September 10th launch date for that. So on August 26, 2019, she said on her Instagram, "My fans and followers, they're a huge inspiration to me. I'm always listening to their feedback and opinions. I'm so grateful they shared their ideas for a new brand name. After much thought and consideration, I'm excited to announce the launch of Skims Solution Wear coming September 10th. I love the idea that the pieces will be the closest thing to someone's skin, skimming with amazingly soft and supportive fabrics, which accentuate the best parts of their bodies for everybody." And she was worried that that change would cost US $10 million, but she did it. And that was because of a lot of the patents that Dr. Jenny Hall already told you about why that would cost money to make that big change. But she did it anyway. So all of those actions fall under the category of corrective action. What did she do for mortification? She admitted later on that it was foolish and ignorant of her to name the brand initially as Kimono. And after reading the Kyoto mayor's letter, Kim said, "Kimono is a traditional ethnic dress and truly symbolizes a sense of beauty, spirits, and value of Japanese. Reading that letter, I felt an understanding. I definitely did not want to disrespect a culture," she added. So although those phrases or sound bites that we have from her response to the letter, they don't say the words, "I am sorry." They don't say the words, "I apologize," but they do admit that she was wrong in the first place, kind of assumes that those who are her loyal supporters will forgive her and potential buyers, since this is a product as well that she's trying to sell. And she thanks them for their support. And so there is a lot of corrective action and mortification, both. Those actions undertaken know that Kim assumes a wrong was committed. So then what was done for evading responsibility? I think that the biggest line that I could point to is the one that I already mentioned, which was when she announced the name of the shapewear line, she's saying, "I did so with the best intentions in mind." Kind of, not that the whole scandal was an accident, but that I promise this was kind of an accident and this isn't how I am. I did my naming with the best intentions in mind. So now you've seen the spread of what were available for PR approaches. What were the strategies? Were they successful? Were they maybe unsuccessful? Is the next part of what I wanted to talk about. So what were the successes for Kim's personal image? One success was she chose some reliable strategies that worked. Mortification and corrective action are rated typically as very effective and appropriate, often compared to other options. And the effectiveness of apologies is consistent with most of the previous scholarly work in the area. So apologies likely to be effective in dealing with problematic situations when you're accused of something. If you take responsibility, apologize, seem sincere, then the people are likely to forgive you. Option 2, or success 2, is that she was able to combine multiple strategies at once that complemented each other. The people who attempt to restore their image, at times, it's not uncommon to use multiple image repair strategies at once. Some combinations might have been less effective than others. This is one combination I think was effective. A third success was because she was using her own social media, she could, to talk about the scandal, she was using Twitter, she was using Instagram, she could really control the narrative rather than be on the defensive with interviews in more traditional forms of media. So she was able to build and talk to her own fan base with really a segmented audience and slowly gain back her reputation and the reputation of her enterprise at the same time. And by bypassing the traditional media forms, she can reach her supporters through new channels, build relationships, manage her own image. And in a statement provided for Insider magazine before announcing the change to her line, she had said words like, "I have a deep respect for the significance of the kimono in Japanese culture, but that doesn't really seem or feel as personal as some of the messages that went on her Instagram and Twitter also about the scandal." Fourth success for her personal image was that time has come and went since 2019, and a lot of other things in the world are occupying people's mind, including the coronavirus. And between that time and now, when the scandal happened, she's graced at least 3 covers of Vogue Japan, which was probably smart, and she did visit Japan, like the mayor suggested that she do in his letter to her. So what were the successes for Kim's shape, for her product and her brand? First, one of the successes for her product and her brand, the product itself is supposed to be just genius. Solution shorts, shorts that come with the right or left leg cut higher for walking maybe in a slit dress, a design that a lot of people have tweeted about and written things like, oh my gosh, I don't have to cut one side of my Spanx anymore. So people kind of forget the name because of how genius the product is. So that was one thing going in her favor. And two, I would say that the strategies were really successful for getting the reputation of the brand back, because Skims is just doing incredibly. It's now valued at US $1.6 billion. Shoppers have really, and it's doing even that well, even during the virus, when shoppers are shifting to looser fitting clothes during lockdowns. And they have over just one singular dress, the soft lounge long slip dress, has over 110 million views on the TikTok app, selling out all the models, got 46,000 people long wait list. And they designed the US Olympic team's underwear and loungewear. So the passage of time, again, is really acting as an opportunity rather than a constraint. And her apologies and her corrective actions went a long way in now how well the brand is doing. So what about the failures? What were some of the issues with the image strategies that she might have chosen? One, I would say Twitter probably isn't the place to start conversations. It's a place to join conversations. And the way that new media change the way audiences participate, it offers maybe too much interactivity and discussion and debate. With so many new channels for information, essentially really anyone can become a journalist at global reach for no cost. And unfortunately, the use of Twitter resulted in a hashtag of #KimOhNo, and that circulated all over social media. Another maybe failure of the campaign was that alienated people aren't always easy to forgive. Lots of fans or potential customers were lost, but it appears she didn't need them to maintain her own career. And her use of social media was really effective to reach her segmented audience of her people who are already her loyal followers and stage her comeback. But in the process, as a business endeavor, she probably lost a number of people who could have been buyers of the product. And that's tough to measure. How many followers did she lose, or how many opportunities did she miss out on? But buying intentions for the line changed. Third, the use of the traditional media front was not great. She addressed the backlash she received over Kimono's name in an interview with the Wall Street Journal in July, saying, "You would think we would have obviously thought it through a little bit deeper. I'm the first person to say, okay, of course, I can't believe we didn't think of this. I obviously had really innocent intentions, but let's listen. And I really want to listen, and I want to take it all in. I do love Japan. My husband was in Japan when all of this was happening. It's a place we love to go to, and I have so much respect." That approach sort of lends itself to the category of denial, because it shifts the blame to people from her team. It also tries to bolster herself as someone with good intentions, evade responsibility that way, sort of distracts by bringing in her husband, and sort of reads as, I have a Japanese friend and travel, so how could I be accused of this bad act? So the early use of traditional media for shifting blame was not an effective strategy, but it got her PR strategy got better as the scandal went on. So what were some suggested improvements at the time, or general recommendations for scandal management? One, I think how it could have been improved at the time would be a member of Kim's extensive PR team should have recognized the landmine in naming this, trying to own a broad use of the word by trademarking it in 2018. Two, what I would label as flinching. People don't really remember this part of the scandal, but one of Kim's statements in June 2019 to the New York Times said that she would keep the name Kimono, And she said she had no plans at the time to change the brand's name in response to accusations of cultural insensitivity. And the concept behind the line is all about inclusivity, diversity, the garment being for everyone. So that was unfortunate. That early statement to the New York Times, somebody should have not approved that statement. Some general recommendations for future scandal management. First, I think when agreeing to the corrective action, the goal should be that the change was the outcome of a personal choice that Kim made, not public pressure, or at least equal parts of both. So I think that reframing why she's doing corrective action and how quickly it comes should be something that's a general recommendation for scandal management. Two, I would say she does want to maintain a strong relationship with her fans through continued communication on things like Instagram and TikTok by keeping those followers updated on her life. They can be loyal to her, and that means that when she might mess up, if she does again, then they are more likely to forgive. So I would not say stop joining conversations and keeping a strong relationship on her own social media. And then third, I would say remain open to switching up, adding, firing members of the PR staff for failure to find problems, because that means they're not proactive enough. Or if they've got projects that you're branding as inclusive or diverse, the PR staff equally needs to be diverse and inclusive. So that may mean adding more staff when you expand the scope of your new project. Lastly, it's been a wonderful time researching the topic. I hope to collaborate with some of you in the future. I look forward to many more presentations today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was really, really wonderful, and absolutely we'll be talking about future collaborations in our last session of the last day. So everyone, please do come along to that if you can, and otherwise be in contact in other ways. Okay, I'm looking for hands. I don't see any yet. There's one just compliment in the chat, so that's great. And I did put up earlier, those weren't Skims socks that the person was wearing in Becca, your presentation, the slide. There was a Paralympian on one side and then another person on the other side, and they had socks that looked like the exact same stuff of Skims. And I just thought, wow, even our feet need Skims now, but maybe they're just the same colour. It's a bit of a facetious comment. Sorry, everyone. Okay, so any questions, any comments, anything at all? Hands up. Okay, I've got one for Rebecca that you know, I'm sure Jenny will have thoughts about this as well. It's about image restoration theory and it being almost, image restoration being almost a lifelong project for Kim because of the sex tape. And she actually had a reaction before the 5 that you listed. So her reaction before denial was kind of pride and shamelessness in a good way. You know, she said on the record, I did it because I felt horny and I did it because I was on Molly, and so what? You know, this was her first reaction, was not denial, it was a pre-denial. And since then we've had, I think, all of the steps that you mentioned. And I ask this because some of you will know that in some of my interviews around the Kardashians' announcement of their final season, I said Kim for president. This happened around the same time that Kanye had announced himself running for president. And I said, Kim for president. And I said, why are you laughing, to journalists as they laughed as I said this? Look at your current president, who was, of course, the former president. And for me, it still makes sense, Kim as president, in terms of there have been other celebrities. She's studying for a law degree. She's one of the best known people in the world. Can she ever redeem her image from the sex tape such that she could credibly run for president?
I know I definitely agree that image restoration is not something that has an easy beginning and an ending in a lifetime of any celebrity. So I agree that she constantly has to, when faced with scandal, just as any celebrity or athlete or politician would, have to have a dedicated PR strategy and moves. So I agree with that part of the question. I don't think it's ever a project that's done, but I think she will be able to continue to make moves that advance her personal image, repair her personal image, and it becomes even more complicated when she's trying to sell a product like a fashion item. She has to think about not just her own image, but the image of her brand, or being so connected to other family members, the brand of the family. So I agree with that part. Do I think she could ever run for the president credibly? Sure. I think that it would be not unusual for celebrities to run after the president that America had and that was elected in 2016.
He who shall not be named, like Voldemort. There's a question here in the chat and a comment. So Catherine Appleford's asked, it was interesting yesterday that some of us wondered whether the kimono naming was a deliberate publicity move. Even bad publicity is good publicity. I wonder what your thoughts are on that for both of you. And then Maggie's also commented, Kim's read law books, so she's already more qualified than some other presidents. So thoughts on bad publicity is good publicity and whether it might have been deliberate from either of you, Jenny or Rebecca.
Yeah, I think, even from what Rebecca was saying about, they've been to Japan and, sort of friends in Japan and kind of trying to legitimize herself, that sort of suggests to me that that she didn't mean to. It was, it wasn't sort of a deliberate strategy. But it's really hard to know, isn't it? I mean, always this sort of, going back even to the previous question, I think it's really interesting how she sort of tries to navigate or straddle this sort of love-hate and sort of becoming or appealing to some audiences as someone who makes cultural faux pas and someone who doesn't always get it right, and then on the other hand sort of this constant reinventing of herself and trying to perfect herself and trying to live up to the sort of I don't know, name or ideal, if you like. I think it's a really interesting thing that she's always trying to straddle that, and I feel like in some ways this is a similar case. What do you think, Rebecca?
I think if she knew how much negative attention the scandal would create, I don't think that they would have moved forward with the patenting in that name. I don't think it was, I know this is going to create a bad scandal, so I'm going to name it that way. I think it was really I have a complicated relationship with my travel to Japan. I have an interest in making a play on my name, Kim. So I think the naming was certainly deliberate, and I agree that I think I am compelled by she had sort of good or at least ignorant intentions in mind about sort of, I didn't know that it would create that kind of bias of cultural insensitivity. I don't think that she thought that, I mean, again, it is hard to know. Like Jenny said, we can never really know, but my read of what has been said about the scandal by her, I think that I'm more compelled by she had some good intentions and is ignorant about how the scandal would play out. So it was not a bad publicity is good publicity type situation.
Yeah, great. We've got maybe time, we can squeeze in one more question. Yes, Leader's got their hand up. Go ahead.
Hey, I was just thinking, because she has got so much negative criticism, and I mean, not only about that, also about general cultural appropriation, and she has a great PR team. I mean, she has to have one. So sometimes I just think if it just goes back to her being not only extremely privileged, but also a bit of narcissistic, that, you know, I can just do it. I mean, no matter what, that she can always just go back to that. And I don't know, for me, sometimes it's just a trait of narcissism. And this is the only way I can explain these things.
Yeah, I think you might be right. I mean, again, it makes me think of Trump as well, and that, you know, when things, you know, he sort of wants to own the things that go well, and then when things go badly, he just blames, you know, his team or whoever, and maybe it's sort of a similar case. But it's extraordinary to me that a PR team wouldn't have flagged this. I mean, really, just incredible. But maybe the legalities. I mean, I was reading something today, and the legalities in this article were saying that actually she wouldn't have been able to prevent people from using the word kimono, but then why bother trademarking it? You know, it just, I still sort of quite can't, I mean, I'm not a legal expert, and if anyone is, please help me out. But, you know, I couldn't really understand how this was different from the UGG case, for example, where they've had all sorts of problems. And I know that Australian manufacturers have been sued because they've exported goods into America. And I forget the name of the company, but there's a company that owns the trademark for UGG. And yet, you know, it's something to do with the fact that kimono, the word kimono, is a generic term. And I don't, you know, they're trying to argue in the UGG case that that is also a generic term, because in Australia, I mean, I grew up and we didn't call it UGG, we called it UGG boots, but it was spelt UGG. And so, I mean, you know, back in the 70s, we had them. They've been around for years and years. So, yeah, so they're trying to argue that. So it's a sort of, yeah, quite amazing that she wouldn't have known more.
Yeah, I think, as Rebecca said, someone in the PR team maybe did get sacked, who knows. All right, well, I see no more hands up, nothing more in the chat. Thank you, Leda, for that question. Oops, one more, just a thank you in the chat. We are now going to have quite a large break until 4 p.m. or 1600 British Standard Time. So that gives us a 3.5 hour break. We've got absolutely amazing sessions coming up in my afternoon. One about voice, an opera, and vocal fry, which is a subject close to my heart. One about rereading celebrity and art and activism. One about law, which promises to be absolutely fascinating. And one about the search for happiness, which will pick up a little bit on Kanye's recent Donda performances. So please do join us again in 3.5 hours. In the meantime, have a lovely lunch or nap or walk or whatever you're doing in your part of the world. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye, everyone.